Hey, I'm Kai from ML Sound Lab, and this is going to be a video where I just sort of rapid fire through some of the biggest questions in guitar. Most of these have been poached from common discussions I've seen across Facebook in various different guitar groups. Now, each one of these questions could have a 10-minute video attached to it and a whole deep dive discussion on it, but I'd really like to break it down to the basics. If you do have any further questions or any comments, feel free to drop them in the comment section down below, as we do our best to respond to every comment on this channel. Question 1, how do I improve my tone? Now, this is sort of a broad question, but there are so many different ways you can improve your tone. A lot of people will go straight to purchasing new gear, however there are quite a few free ways that I'd like to go into. The first thing I want to mention is that a full setup on your guitar can go a really long way towards getting a better guitar tone. I'll go into depth on that one in a later question, but just know that that will be a huge help. I guess this is somewhat tacked on to setups and that sort of thing, but polishing the frets of your guitar can lead to some major improvements, especially if you've got rusting, corrosion, or anything like that on them. Dirty frets can really kill your sustain and give you a lot of awful scratchy noises when you do any vibrato. Another sort of setup related thing you can do is change the height of your pickups. This can have a drastic effect on your tone, so feel free to experiment with this and don't just stick to the manufacturer's recommended settings. A lot of your guitar tone comes down to your technique as well, so make sure you pay close attention to your picking intensity specifically. Your choice of pick can have an effect on the tone, but I do think this more so affects your playing style and your dynamics than anything, so do experiment with this, but don't expect it to be majorly different. Unless of course you're switching from something like a super thin pick to a super thick pick over to something like a brass pick, for instance. That's when you sort of see these big shifts coming, is when you go from one extreme right the way to the other. Now I'm going to jump up ever so slightly in price for this last tip, but if you're playing rock or metal especially, fresh strings can do a world of difference. Rusted strings don't sustain well, they have a very muted, dark sort of tone to them, and they don't really have any attack, but if you change your strings for some fresh ones, you get a lot of brightness, a lot of punch, and it's also a lot nicer in the room because the guitar is going to be a lot louder with the fresh strings on. On the topic of strings, question 2 is, what strings should I use when down tuning? Now obviously this question is going to be a little bit more geared towards metal and rock players, but I've seen this one come up so many times that I feel like it's warranted to put this one in this video. 3 things can affect how your guitar strings work: the tension, the tuning, and the scale length. All 3 of these will interplay with each other in different ways, so be sure to pay attention to them as they'll all affect the others. For instance, if you lower your scale length or you lower your tuning, the tension will drop as well. If you raise the scale length or raise your tuning, the tension will increase. I personally like to match the tensions of my down-tuned guitars to a set that I know I like in E standard. So for me that would be a Fender Strat scale length, or 25.5 inches, a E standard tuning, and a pack of 10 to 46 strings. An incredible resource for calculating string gauges that I think is super underrated is the calculator from Windspear. If you have a reference set in mind, so for instance the 10 to 46 set, you can plot in the original strings, the new scale length, and the tuning that you'd like to go to, and it will spit out a recommended gauge for you that's matching the tension and the feel. So for instance, if I wanted to tune down from E standard on a 25.5 inch scale guitar over to B standard on a 27 inch guitar, I'd take the 10 to 46 pack, I'd plot that into Windspear's calculator, and it would spit out a 13 to 60 set. This would be a great place to start, but you can always experiment from there and figure out what really works for you. I use this mainly as a jumping off point, but I find that I never have to stray too far from these gauges. Also, this isn't sponsored or anything, but I do pick Windspear strings as my brand of choice, especially when doing drop tune sets, as they're one of the only brands that offer balanced tension sets for drop tunings. So for instance, this 30-inch guitar I've got tuned down to drop E, it's still got a balanced tension with a 15 to 80 gauge drop set. The next question is going to be one that will plague every guitarist at some point in their life. Question 3, how do I remove unwanted noise from my guitar tone? Now the first thing I always suggest whenever people come to me with noise issues in their guitar is to just step away from any sort of electricals. If you've got keyboards or computers or pedals or phones or anything like that anywhere near your pickups, you can introduce some electromagnetic interference. I've had super annoying issues with RGB units in particular, things like RGB light up keyboards or the case fans in a PC for instance. I actually had to switch out my PC case from a Perspex side over to a full aluminium case bass, and that helped an awful lot of my noise issues. Noise issues can also come from faulty gear, but this is somewhat rarer. It's also the most annoying one to troubleshoot, as you sort of have to replace everything in your chain. So replace your guitar, swap that out for a different guitar, see if the noise continues. If the noise is still there, swap out your cable. If the noise is still there, swap out your pedal, swap out your interface, change the power supply you're using, change the different plug sockets, just rule out every single part of your chain and try and figure out where the noise is coming from. Now sometimes this can just be dirty power in your house, which is particularly true of older houses. Unfortunately, the only solution here would be to buy something like a power conditioner or a power filter. There are some setups that are just naturally noisy. Running a lot of gain, for instance, you'll get more noise than if you were running a clean tone. Also, things like single coil pickups naturally pick up more hum. Some guitars with unwaxed pickups also pick up more hum, so just be aware of what you're using and whether or not you should be expecting noise. Typically, I'd reserve a noise gate as the last thing I want to try. I want to troubleshoot the noise first and figure out if it's something that I can get over before just cutting it off and cutting off some of my signal at the same time. So since we're at the halfway point, I want to quickly say if you're enjoying what we do, please drop us a subscribe. We do a lot of informational guitar content like this on this channel, so please stick around and you'll find something else you like, I'm sure. Question 4. How can I get better at guitar? One thing I want to mention here is that there's a big difference between practice and just playing, just noodling, just jamming, whatever. If you just play the things you know and don't push yourself, you're not going to get much better. You have better dexterity and better coordination, but you're not going to be more technically proficient just naturally. At least not in any kind of decent time frame. Genuine improvement will largely come from active practices. Focused practice sessions with achievable goals are probably the best way to do this. So for instance, if you learn a song that's quite difficult, but you learn it at half the speed, you can slowly bring that speed up over time until you've got it up at full speed. That way you've got a sort of measurable way to dictate how you're doing with your practice. I should add, please don't let this kill your passion. If you practice all day, every day, it will be boring, it will be rudimentary, and you just won't have fun. So make sure you put some time aside to just have fun with the guitar, just noodle around, play with pedals, whatever you want to do. Just make sure you still enjoy it. Don't lose the passion. Question 5. How do I set up my guitar? Now this is obviously going to be a difficult one to put into such a short form rapid fire thing, but I'll go over the basics of it. I follow Ron Thorne's train method when I'm setting up a guitar. Tune, relief, action, intonation, and then noodle. You want to start by tuning your guitar to the desired pitch. So if you're tuning down to drop C, for instance, this will be C, G, C, F, A, D. I do like to tune between each of these steps, but it's a much harder acronym to remember, so I just stick with calling it the train method. The next one is going to be relief. This is the truss rod that goes up the back of your guitar neck and is usually adjustable by either a Allen key slot at the top of your guitar or a spoke wheel wrench at the bottom. Don't be scared to adjust your truss rod, by the way. A lot of people are petrified about this, but if you go quarter of a turn at a time and you don't force it, it's probably going to be absolutely fine. Typically, when I'm setting my neck relief, I want a tiny amount of gap at the 12th fret when I'm holding both the first and last frets. Next, you want to adjust your action. This is the height of the strings coming off of your bridge. Normally, this will be either saddles like I've got on this guitar here, or it's going to be a full bridge system like the Tune-o-matic of a Les Paul. You'll adjust this with either an Allen key, thumb screws, or a slotted screwdriver. I will typically shoot to get the strings about 1.5mm away from the 12th fret on the low string and 1.25mm away from the 12th fret on the high string. If I'm running a baritone guitar like this Balaguer Growler, I'll bump that up a little bit and I'll go for 2mm on the low string and 1.5 on the high string. I like to measure this with feeler gauges, they seem to work the best for me. Next, you're going to check the intonation. This is going to be screws at the back of the bridge typically that will move the string backwards and forwards. This will get your guitar perfectly in tune at the 12th fret. Now guitars aren't perfect, so they're not going to be in tune across every single fret, but as long as the 12th is in and the open note is in, you're going to be mostly there. If the 12th fret comes up sharp when you fret it, you want to move the saddle further away from the nut. If it comes up flat, you want to move the saddle closer towards the nut. The final step of the train method is just a noodle. Have a little play around on your guitar and see if you like it. See if it's all working for you, if you like the action, if you like how it's feeling, and just go from there. Again, this is a very heavily abridged version of what a full setup entails, so if you'd like to see some more on that, please let me know. Question 6. How do I record guitar at home? This is a pretty big one, especially in the current scene, as everyone's looking to record their stuff at home. This is another pretty huge question, but I'm going to break this down into a bite-sized look. You're going to need some hardware to start with. You need a guitar, a cable, an interface, something to monitor it on, so either headphones or studio monitors, and you're going to need either a laptop, a desktop computer, or even a phone or iPad. You will also need some software in order to get your guitars recorded. This is a digital audio workstation, or DAW. You can also use a guitar amp sim if you don't have a real guitar amp and cab setup. Both of these are readily available for free. The actual method of setting everything up depends on your DAW of choice, but typically you want to open the options menu of your DAW, set your interface as the input and output device, create a new track in your DAW, set the input of that track as the input on your interface, and then add the guitar amp sim onto the plugins menu of that track. Enable the monitoring on your track and you should be able to hear your guitar coming through your headphones. Thank you for checking this video out. I really do hope it proved to be useful. I'll happily do a part 2 if anyone's got any more burning questions, but also drop them in the comments section down below and I'll get to answering them as soon as possible. That's all for this one. I've been Kai.